Level up your LA Kings experience with the new Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access. Enjoy great seats to the game along with premier dining inside the Lexus Club with all-you-can-eat food and non-alcoholic beverages. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings item and parking with your purchase. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn rewards on each purchase from the only ticket company that rewards you for buying. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings.
You're listening to an LA Kings podcast. For more episodes of this and every other Kings program, visit lakings.com/podcast.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
All right, we are here to recap Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Playoffs first series round. Was that a first series matchup? I don't even know what. I always get caught up on this. But anyway, joining me to help out Scott Burnside. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm outstanding. I feel a little, sort of a little ragged after what was a rather chaotic end to Game 1 of the first round series between the Oilers and the Kings, but I think that's understandable.
And also, Jack Jablonski. How are you doing today, Jack?
I'm great. It's, talk about a fun Game 1 in terms of entertainment. So, by all means, when you come away with a win in that fashion, it's a great day.
Yeah, now, unfortunately, no disrespect to either of you two gentlemen, but there's a conversation going on in one of my text threads that I find fascinating as a Kings fan. I don't know. Well, Scott, you might remember the Miracle on Manchester. I don't. And Jack, I guarantee you don't remember the frenzy on Figueroa. The question is, aside from the cup clinching games, where does this rank in terms of craziest wins in Kings history? Is this top 3? And as far as craziest, I don't know. I'm not going to go back and argue about it, but I mean, it was certainly one of the most dramatic playoff wins I've ever seen in person.
Yeah, well, and I've been fortunate to have been at a few playoff games over the years, and I was trying to think as we were getting ready to tape this morning. That ranks right up there, and you see, the great thing about the playoffs is you sometimes see those kinds of gigantic shifts in momentum, and where one team's like an avalanche, coming down the hill, and then all of a sudden it's the other team. And I would say that usually it's whatever team has the second part of that avalanche equation usually prevails. And it's what was so dramatic about Game 1 was that it just was when Connor McDavid scored to tie, make it 5-5 with less than 3 minutes to go. Or 2 minutes ago, I guess, right around that 2-minute mark. I'm sure there were a lot of people across the hockey world who were like, this Oiler team is inevitable, not to use a Thanos thing, but that it seemed inevitable in that moment that the Oilers were going to win that game. And then, whatever it was, 60 seconds or whatever it was, and Phil Deneau scores, like Phil Necro, right, with the knuckleballer, and now, we're talking about something completely different today. So in terms of, where that ranks, I'm not sure I can answer that part of it, but dramatic. And, as Phil Deneau said after the game, high, low, high. That's, you graph this one out and it's pretty dramatic.
Well, that's why go ahead.
Just to build off of that, obviously I also can touch on where it ranks, but you go back to the previous 18 games that they've played in the last 3 years in the postseason, and so many times we've seen the Kings lead, and then all of a sudden Edmonton comes back and makes it interesting. And like Scott said, that one difference is this time the Kings were able to finish on top. And Jim Hiller touched on it in the post game, and it was to him it's like, well, it doesn't matter how you got that win, and they walk out of the building, with some relief, right? But at the same time, they walk out with the lead, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, the fact that the Kings never trailed and that this wasn't a comeback, right? It wasn't a successful comeback. Kind of, to me, I don't know. Like I said, I just don't. if you have to rank dramatic endings, that goes up there. But I it just goes in a different category for me because it wasn't. Yes, the Kings won, and yes, it was dramatic, but it probably should never have gotten to that point in the first place. We're gonna come back to that conversation at the end of this because I do want to sort of dive through the notes. So for those who don't know, the format for these playoff recaps is I take notes, or I try to take notes when I'm watching the game, and then we go through them. So I'm just going to start reading through my notes from game one. Now, to be clear, it was the first game I had attended since January, so I was a little caught up in the moment, and I just wanted to enjoy
Welcome
it.
back. Great
Thank
to
you.
have you back, Jesse.
Appreciate it. So my notes are not as insightful or well, they're just not great. But we're going to go through it. So first things first, I really liked so for those who weren't there, there was a video before the game featuring Isaiah Thomas. Not Isaiah Thomas. I keep calling him Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Mustafa. Thank you. Friend of the program, friend of the organization, Isaiah Mustafa. And I had seen the video during, for those who don't know, they do tech rehearsal about an hour and a half before the game. So I had seen most of the video during the rehearsal as I was sitting in the press box eating my pregame meal. And it features Isaiah walking around an empty arena. And I couldn't tell if it was live or taped because I was looking to see if he was down there and being filmed and if it was going to be different. And it turns out, no, he was filmed in an empty arena. And then there's a transition moment in the intro video where it switches from taped to live. And I have to say, it was an incredibly cool effect. Because it reaches a point where he says, what's the difference between, a regular season game or the playoffs? Or I can't remember what the thing is, but he says it and he's standing in front of an empty section. And then the screen switches and all of a sudden it goes to live, but he's standing in the exact same spot in front of the exact same section. And all of a sudden it's full of Kings fans in jerseys going crazy for a playoff game. And he says, the difference is you, the fans. And I just thought it was I thought it was really cool. I didn't know that part was coming. I didn't see it in rehearsal. And I'm usually pretty immune to that sort of showmanship or contrivance. And I was caught off guard, and I thought that was pretty cool. And then before, the proceedings continued, and before we got to the anthem cues, there was already a "Go Kings Go" chant in the crowd during the darkness as the lights were flashing and the building was preparing to launch into the rest of the show. And I was a little concerned based on the last three playoff outings and the fact that it was a Monday night and you just never know what a crowd is going to be up for, Scott. And I thought last night was a playoff worthy performance out of the crowd, and it started before the anthems even started.
Yeah, no, these are real things. The what that crowd brings is a real thing. And I'll just preface it by saying, I had a conversation with Warren Fogle the other day, and we were talking about his first playoff experience, which was in Carolina. And it was a first round series. They knocked off the defending Stanley Cup champions. And he just talked about, sort of being overwhelmed by the noise and the crowd. Darcy Comfort said the same thing about his first playoff experience, that's what he remembers. And, for the handful of Kings players last night who were playing in their first ever playoff game, I mean, what a great treat for them. And I'm sure, when you talk to Drew Doughty and when you talk to Andrei Kopitar, Phil Deneau, or any of the other veterans who have been down this long road many, many times, it's a real thing. I know, sometimes you talk about it's a neat, oh, yes, crowd really jazzed us up. Listen, when you go to a place where it's not like that, and I'm not throwing shade on the Toronto Maple Leafs, but having spent a lot of time in Toronto over the years, much different audience, very corporate. Lots of, I'm sure it's been nice. It was nice in Game 1 against Ottawa, but I've been in Toronto lots of times where you don't have that feeling. And so, to your point, Jesse, I think those things are important. And of course, the way the game started with an early Kings goal. I mean, can you draw a line from A to B? Well, debatable, but the results are the results. So.
there was a
I
comment
think
made. Sorry, go ahead,
what
Jeff.
goes no, it's my bad. I think what goes a long way is Jesse complimenting the pregame antics because notoriously Jesse does not love the some of the pregame things. I talk about my best example would be Vegas's pregame antics. Jesse is notoriously known for hating anything that goes on before the game there, but um, credit to the production team and Isaiah Mustafa because it was an awesome transition, like Jesse mentioned. It was really neat for to go from a recorded thing to then getting the crowd hyped up with the Go Kings Go. And like you said, Scott, A to B, I don't know in terms of a direct result, but by all means, a credit to the crowd, showing up for a 7 o'clock game on a Monday. And, it really showed the passion within the community. And it just feels like it's a little different this year compared to the years past.
It is, and there was a comment, Jack, made by a colleague of ours in the press box, and I don't think this person was wrong per se. But and listen, this is going to happen a lot today, and I apologize to both of you. But this last night was a game for Kings fans,
Yep.
and like when I say fans, I mean like longtime fans, like not and no disrespect to anybody who isn't old enough to have been a fan for longer than the last 4 or 5 years, and no disrespect to anybody who had a career that kept them from exclusively focusing on one team. But, the comment, Jack, was that this was the best crowd, playoff crowd that person had seen, at least recently, for Kings fans. And I wanted to say, like, right, well, it's not the best crowd I've seen for a Kings playoff game. It was up there. It was great. But, there were some fairly good moments in Kings playoff history in my lifetime. And my lifetime is even, limited. The organization's been around for almost 60 years now, and there have been some playoff series, and so but it was just really nice, and it did feel I loathe comparisons to 2012 and 14 because it's just such easy, like, oh, that's the highlight of franchise history. Well, let's just compare everything good that ever happens to that. But last night, I mean, I said it on Kings Talk. Well, whatever. We'll get to it because the notes mention some of it, and I don't want to step on the notes. So we're going to move on. Two anthems. Listen, whatever. I don't like two anthems. I don't like one anthem, so having to stand through two bugs me, but we're going to have to do it, so whatever. 3 minutes in the first 3 minutes of the game, and I confess, Jack, I didn't see all of them. There were a few hits that made the crowd react, and where I found myself, swinging my neck around trying to figure out like where on the ice had something happened because I missed it, and I could just hear the crowd oohing and awing, and I was like, oh, dang, I missed it.
I feel like that happens so many times in every game one of a playoff series, right? Everyone's so amped up and ready to go, and it really feels like bodies are flying to begin just to get the crowd into it, and frankly, just to kind of get your feet and your body into the game, right? It's just one of those things that it seems it always happens in game one, just for people to get themselves into the game, and by all means, it worked as the Kings quickly took advantage of some opportunities in the first few minutes and ended up on the power play.
So then they get to the power play, and they rolled out the 5 forwards, which frankly surprised me. I thought with Drew Doughty back in the lineup, I assumed, as many people did, I think that he would find himself back on the top power play unit. He did not. So credit to Hiller for sticking with something that worked and not just sort of acquiescing to tradition. And they scored. Kevin Fiala, with a really nice pass, found Andrei Kuzmenko. It wasn't an exact replay of when Kuzmenko found Fiala on the opposite side of the net and he tapped it in, but it was the same result, which is that they scored. And listen, a nice play by Fiala, a nice play by Kuzmenko, but more importantly to me, it cued the crowd to start chanting Skinner's name, which lasted all night long, and that was one of the things I didn't want to step on. Outstanding play by the power play, and outstanding reaction from the crowd to not let Edmonton stop hearing about it after they scored.
But and like I mean, there's so many. It's impossible to escape the past when you're playing the same team for the fourth straight year, and when you have been dispatched in each of the three previous years. And when you get dispatched a year ago, when you score no power play goals in 5 games and you give up 9 on, I want to say 20, whatever the number is, it's enormous, right? So that mismatch in special teams, in less than 3 minutes into the game, you have rewritten that part of the narrative. I'm not sure you can, you know, overstate how important that is. And, we've talked a lot about Kuzmenko since he got here and, his importance to the team, his importance to the power play. I thought, and Jack knows this because he had to wade through my copy, but I thought Kuzmenko was the best, and if not best, certainly the most dynamic player on the ice last night. Okay, Connor McDavid did have 4 points. All right, but I thought Kuzmenko was outstanding in his first ever playoff game, and to score that early power play goal was pretty enormous, I think.
I think for me, when we talk about when players slump, the monkey off the back moment, right? I thought that power play goal was a monkey off the back moment for like the whole team.
Yes.
Just finally, we got that out of the way. We don't need to hear about it. We don't need to hear about being oh for this, oh for that last year. Now we have an opportunity to just go play our game. We have that momentum. And now we know we can almost, again, they won the power play battle 2-0 last night. But for me, it was a confidence booster among knowing that, okay, this another reason that quote unquote, this is a different year, right? Now they've got a power play that they feel confident in that can, whether it's match or even do better than the Edmonton power play, game one, they did that. And that to me was that monkey off the back moment for the whole unit.
So we're going to kind of jump ahead. This is another perfect example of my notes not being tip top because we're jumping ahead 5 minutes to Drew Doughty's penalty. And it's sort of the flip side of the same coin that you were talking about, Scott. Yes, important to score on the power play, when you hadn't scored any power play goals last season, but also now Edmonton gets their first power play, and I just wrote down, must kill this. Yep. And, simple as that, because when you don't score any power play goals and Edmonton goes whatever 45% on their power play, okay, you scored a power play goal in your first attempt. Lovely, great, wonderful, but you have to now stop them from doing the same. And the Kings did. And, is tiny little victories. It's only the first period. It's only the first power play for each team. Presumably there will be many more in the series, but so far at this point in my notes, 1-0 Kings on special teams play. And Jack, I thought that was, you talk about monkey off the back moment. Obviously they had killed some Edmonton power plays over the last 3 seasons, but I thought that was an important moment to show we can play both or all 3 sides of the puck, I guess.
No question. It's just the other side of the coin, being able to, show them that not only can we score a power play goal, but at the same time, we can kill yours off as well. And I agree that was a must kill because it brings back that same narrative of the last few years. If they get that first one and all of a sudden it's back to a 1-1 game. Now, they've set the narrative in terms of what is a penalty and what isn't a penalty in terms of those types of plays with the sticks and the cross checks. And now, you talked about bringing the air into the building when they score a power play goal. That very much could have deflated, the crowd and in a little bit of the here we go again type of moment. And for the Kings to kill that off and do so the way they did, not allowing the Oilers to really set up in that first power play, I thought was really important because that's where the Kings have been so disruptive this whole season. Against the top units is not letting them set up. We can get to some of the other stuff in terms of what I saw on the penalty kill later, but for me, that first one, Edmonton never really got to set up, which was really important.
Then after that, I don't know if it had happened prior. I'm sure this player was on the ice and touching the puck, but for whatever reason, it was after that penalty kill that I started noticing the crowd booing Darnell Nurse every time he touched the puck. Yeah. And this is another moment where I say, man, good for the LA crowd. And my memory on this topic may not be totally reliable, so apologies to everybody who's older than me or who has a better memory than me. But my recollection is that Kings fans, generally speaking, were not a crowd that booed. a lot prior to around the trade deadline 2001. And anybody who knows what I'm talking about will know what I'm talking about. But after the trade deadline of 2001, I noticed the crowd much more encouraged or allowed themselves to boo certain players on a fairly regular basis. And it hasn't really, we're not Winnipeg where they pick one player per game and just get on that player and stick with it for the whole game. But last night, the Darnell Nurse thing, I was like, oh, that's very funny. They boo him every time he, or the first time he touched the puck. And I was like, okay. Actually, you know what? It did happen earlier. And my initial thought was, oh, they're booing Edmonton for sitting back and not leaving the zone fast enough. And I was like, oh, okay, that's whatever. But then I realized, oh, no, it's every time Darnell Nurse touches the puck. And I kind of thought it wouldn't last. I was like, oh, okay, this is great. It's a playoff game. We're up 1-0. Power play scored. The penalty kill did its job. And now we're booing Darnell Nurse and chanting Skinner's name. Okay, this is like, all right, this is a good first period. They did it all night long, near as I could tell. And it was great. I talked about it on King's Talk. It was just great. I do want to talk about this, Scott. I made a note, and I didn't think it would matter, but my note was, and I don't remember exactly when in the first period this was, although if I went back and look at the shift chart, I guarantee you I could pinpoint it. The note was 79 shouldn't be getting pushed around or losing board battles. And I understand that Sammy Helenius is a young player, but there was a board battle in the first period. It was probably that fourth line's only shift in the first period because they didn't play very much last night. And given how big and tall and strong Helenius is, I was a little bit surprised at how easily he was shoved off the puck and wasn't stopping Edmonton along the boards.
Yeah, it was, listen, first of all, I thought the fourth line early on might have been, in fact, I'm sure it was their first shift, actually drew the penalty that led by Brett Kulak that led to the first power play goal. And I was really pleased for those guys, right? I mean, that's a trio, three of those guys, Turcotte, Helenius, and Malott. Have I said that correctly?
Yeah.
Not Malott. All playing in their first ever playoff game. Draw a penalty, leads to a goal. It's pretty cool. They didn't get a ton of time. Some of that's the power play issue. And then they were on the ice in the third period, not to jump ahead and, spoil the narrative here, but they were on the ice for one of the goals by Matthias Janmark.
Yep.
And that was sort of that at the end. And you mentioned that here's Helenius played 347 last night. Turcotte played 413. Let's see here. Malott played 345. And I think my guess is ideally, Jim Hiller would love to have that fourth line out there. I don't know what's the optimum amount. 7, 8 minutes, 8, 9 minutes. In a perfect world, you're rolling the four lines because you're ahead and you're controlling the pace of play. And I do think, to your point, Jesse, when we've seen some really nice. We saw Helenius with a 2-goal game in Seattle, right? I mean, there are moments, and I think Alex Turcotte. I can't wait for him to have a long stretch where he's healthy, and because the kid's really he gets it, and he's such a good kid and so talented. Anyway, I'm sure it will be interesting to see. Do you make a lineup change? Do you go to Trevor Lewis? I don't know what you do if you're Jim Hiller moving forward, but it's not ideal having a guy like Sammy Helenius and his size and some of the things he brings to the game for the most part playing less than 4 minutes. So, maybe that's a one-off, and certainly the way the game unraveled in the third period, you probably wouldn't expect to see a lot of them anyway, but they sort of were part of the unraveling. So It will be interesting to see how it moves forward. And it's a good point by you because in this series, because of Matthias Ekholm's absence, the way, and you and I talked about this, Jesse, when I told you that I felt very confident that the Kings were going to, that they matched up very well, is playing in the offensive zone, disrupting the Oilers on the back end, taking advantage of the lack of one of the top shutdown defensemen, I think fair to say, in the NHL, and certainly one of the most important players in Edmonton. You need that from your fourth line, and you need them to be playing more than they did in game one.
And that to me is the a little concerned, right? Because guess what? They played 3 minutes and 45 seconds on home ice when they got to choose when to put them out there.
Yeah.
So that to me is something that's going to have to be paid attention to. The Kings, I guess you go back because it's like Edmonton, of course, McDavid and Draisaitl play 20 plus minutes a game. We know that they've done that. They consistently have done that. They're used to it, right? So they don't necessarily play four lines. The Kings are used to playing a fourth line, 5-7 minutes a game in the playoffs. Of course, you'd love to roll them out, but Scott, you mentioned it. It's like when you're controlling the game, you can roll them out there more. Well, they did that, and then they didn't because they gave up a goal to make it a 4-2 game, and they didn't see the ice the rest of the game after that early goal for Edmonton in the third. So they did have control. They did have a multi-goal lead, and they still played 3 minutes and 45 seconds. So the Kings, I don't think, are necessarily used to playing three lines compared to Edmonton. Does that, how much does that impact as the series goes on? To be determined, but definitely a narrative that we'll have to pay attention to moving forward.
Yeah, and we're gonna revisit this when we get into the third period in that goal that Scott referenced. And don't let me forget, guys, when we get there to mention Spence and Clark, because they are not fourth liners, but they also did not play a ton of minutes comparatively. So we're gonna come back to that. The next note I have is missed calls. Kings make them pay with a goal, and that was the Quentin Byfield goal. And moments before the Byfield goal, I think it was Alex Laferriere got drilled into the boards. And when you combine the Darnell Nurse, cross-check to Quentin Byfield that earned him a suspension, and there was an event, I don't remember if it was Calgary or Seattle, but in the regular season there was another event where the Kings did not respond with violence to violence. I had this moment where in between the hit on LaFerriere and the goal where I was like, well, somebody do something, right? There's a very fan reaction of like, well, come on, they hit you, hit them back. And as I said, I'm loath to make comparisons to 2012, but I'm going to make one to 2014 because back then, me and Madame Hockey Friends would love to use the phrase composure. And I think Daryl Sutter used it, or Kopitar used it, or somebody used it, and we sort of latched onto it, and we were like, yeah, composure. You got to out-composure your opponents. And hashtag out-composure. And that was an idea that I was sort of fascinated with, that you could weaponize composure, or that you could make composure a competitive thing. And the Kings did not respond with violence. They responded with a goal. And a great goal by Quentin Byfield, right? Talk about presence of mind to score the goal that he did. And as I said on Twitter last night, we've seen him score all sorts of goals from all over the place. I believe that's the first time we've seen him score from behind the goal line. And so that, to me, sort of set the tone for that game, and might be the identity of this team is composure. Don't get rattled. Don't respond with violence. For God's sake, don't take a stupid penalty or get yourself suspended and give Edmonton any more of an advantage than they might have. But Scott, that is not an easy thing for a team to master.
Yeah, well, and it's funny. I made note of that too, because there were actually, I think, two hits. Like he looked like poor Alex Laferriere on that shift, because he took one in the numbers, and you're right. He probably deserved to have drawn a penalty for it. And I can't remember who hit him, but it was a hard hit, and it was pretty much in the numbers.
Yeah.
Anyway, then he got up, and I believe it was like he was collateral damage after another collision and got knocked back the other way. And I was watching to make, just to see, did he, get up, go to the bench or whatever. But, as it turned out, I thought he had a really nice game, actually. And then the goal is really important for me for a couple of reasons. I thought Drew Doughty was outstanding last night. We led all Kings a nice time at 26:09. Not bad for an old guy who missed half the season and has, we took some time off to get ready for the playoffs. But to me, that goal is his. He gets some space and he walks in with the puck. His shot is a hard, difficult shot, and Stuart Skinner gets in the right spot to make the stop. But, Quentin Byfield, long reach, nice, 7-foot wingspan or whatever it is, and to corral that rebound and have the presence of mind as Skinner's trying to get back in the net to see an opening there. And I just thought it was really important, score in the last minute. And you're right, Jesse, things, you could have had a scrum after the little Ferrier hit. You could have had a penalty. It wasn't, but you take advantage of the play that goes on. And I'm with you. You only take two minors all night. Sorry, is that right? Gave up two power play. Yeah, two minors and two power play opportunities for the Oilers. Man, that's the blueprint, right? I mean, if that's how it goes every game, then the Kings are, once again, in theory, put themselves in the best possible position to win games every single night. And, there's a good example. Take a 2-0 lead late in the first period. I thought it was a really nice and important play that showed that presence of mind and maturity.
Yeah, I mean, I've always, growing up and playing hockey in Minnesota, and my
Are you from Minnesota, Jack?
Yeah, did you guys know that?
I didn't know that.
State of hockey,
yeah, that's new information to me.
Yeah, Mecca of America, But for me, in experience with the coaches that I work with, you always talked about that the momentum switches and how it can lead in and out of periods, and getting a goal in the last minute, and we obviously know that that played the case in the second period as well in terms of momentum. It just gives you such a different vibe going in up 2 goals opposed to 1 or whatever it is in terms of how you. Whatever the score is, but that goal in the last minute, all of a sudden you give yourself a little bit of breathing room. You feel good, even better about the period and Byfield's goal. For me, it's the awareness, right? You notice the goalie isn't back in his crease yet because he had to come out and challenge the Doughty shot, and then a great execution in terms of putting that puck on the backside of Skinner to get that puck to roll its way into the net. So. Again, we'll talk about it as the second period ends, but the momentum, proved to be a huge swing as the Kings obviously move into that second period and quickly, add to their lead.
So my final note of the first period was the game is starting to get chippy, which was a sort of a nice way of describing it. Going to burn through a couple notes to start the second period before I get to one that I want to talk to Jack about because he noticed the same thing I do. So the first note of period 2 is that the nurse booing continues. Again, good job out of the fans. The second note is that it appeared to me that the Kings were attempting wraparound attempts on Skinner. And it didn't work, although I had written down that they'll do it eventually, but they didn't, but that's fine. And then the note that Jack noticed that I also noticed and that ultimately doesn't matter, Scott, but it's something that I am fascinated by, is that at one point we noticed in the press box that Andrei Kuzmenko and Adrian Kempe had switched wings, at least for portions of the game, and it was a fairly long stretch where all of a sudden Kempe was on the left and Kuzmenko was on the right. Now, this is one of those rare cases where I don't think it matters, but generally speaking, I do think it matters. Well, I know it matters because it's clearly not random, and in a sport like hockey, anything that isn't random is obviously by design and obviously matters to somebody. I have no idea why they did it. I would love to tie up every coach and player and front office staff member and give them sodium barbiturate or whatever truth serum is and ask them why do you do these certain things, but it was just a thing that I caught and Jack also caught.
So it goes hand in hand with the comment you made on the wraparounds, right? Kuzmenko on the right wing side ends up pulling Skinner out of his net and comes within millimeters of getting that wraparound. I believe that was in the second period. So yeah, of course, something to note. Will Hiller ever give us a truthful answer on the reasoning? Unlikely, but
no chance.
we can dig and pry in the media sessions there.
Yeah,
I didn't just on that wraparound, until I watched it again this morning. I didn't realize what a great save Skinner actually made. It was hard to tell. On wraparound, sometimes you don't quite get the puck to the net. It's on the side or on the post or whatever. Skinner makes an unbelievable save on what was a pretty incredible play by Kuzmenko. So, it will be interesting to see, to your point, Jesse, does it make sense for them to swap wings occasionally to maybe open up that kind of driving of the net from the off wing? I don't know. But anyway, good on you, both of you, to have noticed that. And it would be a total lie if I told you that I had noticed it. Well, because I certainly did not.
Well, Jack, has heard me rant about which player plays on which wing for many years. So I don't know, maybe I planted the seed. But honestly, the first time I noticed it, I just sort of blew it off and was like, okay, well, it's an attacking zone shift and guys move around, and I just saw Kuzmenko on the right side, and I was like, well, that's odd because a lot was made of the fact that he's a right-handed shot. And then I thought it was very funny that as soon as they got the right-handed shot, they immediately put him on the left wing. And I was like, yeah, that tracks for everything we've ever done. But whether it was Grunstrom or Kaliev, or there's been a ton of guys who were left-handed shots who played was Grunstrom? Yeah, Grunstrom was a left-handed shot. Who played the right side early in his career, but when he came to the Kings was sort of forced to move to the left. And Kempe, who is a left-handed shot, who started as a center, then a left winger, and is now on the right wing, which would not have seen coming if you asked me years ago. So it's just little things. And like I said, not everybody, but plenty of people over the years have given me a hard time about caring. And as I said, it's not that I care. It's just that I know it's not random. And again, my point is always, if it was random, it would be random, but it's not. It's very clearly a pattern. And in a game like hockey that is random, you can only control so many things, and they obviously want to control that. So jumping around a little bit, the second period, I did not keep very good notes at all. Around the 10-minute mark, I had noticed, this is like maybe the 11-minute mark, I felt like the game was getting a little sloppy. And a little bit out of control. But by 5 minutes left in the period, I felt like the Kings had sort of regained control and had tightened the game up. And then Kempe scores on a pass from Andrei Kuzmenko. And, I'll let you guys talk about this because I was sort of caught up in the moment of the game, but I felt like that shift where Kempe scored was a result of a lot of shifts leading up to that goal, where the Kings had sort of imposed their will on Edmonton, for lack of a better phrase, Scott.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because I was just looking at the score sheet, and Connor McDavid's on the ice. He's on the ice for like almost all of the goals last night. It's crazy, bro and con. But he's on the ice on that one, and again, it's the relentlessness of the Kings in the offensive zone. This is this is the textbook. Both these goals to me are almost exactly the same. The Kempe goal and 3 minutes later, the Phil Deneau goal, the first goal for him, the first of two on the night. To me, they're almost identical in the sense that you pressure the puck. Even with Connor McDavid on the ice, and he's on the ice for both those goals, you take the puck away from him. You don't allow them to break out. And then there's the breakdown, and part of it's, the loss of Ekholm. Part of it's, it's just, the Kings this is their bread and butter, right? I mean, you want to play 5-on-5, and this is how they hurt you at 5-on-5. And it's a delightful little pass from Kuzmenko. Hey, Kopitar does all the heavy lifting on this goal. Wins the battle behind the net. Kuzmenko sees where Kempe is going, just nudges the puck to him, and Kempe makes it look easy. I thought both those goals were, again, textbook of how this series, if you're drawing out the blueprint for the Kings, these two goals, and it looked like at that point, you're like, okay, that's, I talked to another reporter, and he was going downstairs, late in the second period. He's like, it's over. I'm going to start writing. I was like, whatever. But anyway, I thought those two goals were really important. And again, it's forcing the breakdown, and it's, to me, illustrates how this Kings team did last night and how they can exploit the Oilers moving forward.
Two things there that you said, Scott. I think first is, you talked to the reporter and he said, it's over, start the recap. So many, I mean, like for myself, who, so many of us have to write recaps of the game. I started in the second period, and the sentence started with like the Kings like won the game, controllingly or handily or whatever. And then obviously that sentence quickly got deleted as the game went on. But then the second thing is back on, those two goals is that's their bread and butter, right? The Kings are so good getting the puck in and forcing the opponent's defense, they taking away their time and space, turning the puck over, and then creating. And it started of the Warren Fogle to know Trevor Moore line. Like that's the line that does it so often. And then I think it really built this year on the Quentin Byfield line because of how much he's emerged and the tenacity of Kevin Fiala and obviously Alex Laferriere. But then to see that top who's been a little bit more the pretty plays and the nice little passing sequence, all of those types of different goals that line has had. Then you get them to get in behind the goal line, create chaos, get that turnover, and then of course Kempe with the beautiful finish. That was great to see because it was the difference, the ways that the Kings can score goals, but that line specifically and how dangerous they are.
You guys both mentioned the Deneau goal. My only note on that one was Byfield defers to Deneau, who buried one from the slot after a turnover. So we're going to move on from that because I think we covered both of those goals pretty well there. Edmonton scores with 4 seconds left, 5 seconds left in the second period. And my only note on that was let's not let it mean anything. Because at that point, it's like, it's it's not even the last minute of the second period. It's the dying seconds of the second period. And you're like, oh, okay, I don't love a last minute goal at the end of a period or the beginning of a period, but it's still 4-1. The Kings have still looked very good. Edmonton is gonna get goals. Let's not. But I thought it was important to let it die there, and of course it didn't. We'll get to that in a second. It was Draisaitl from McDavid, and so you're like, all right, well. Yeah.
I'm curious whether both of you. When you go back to the replay and as we foreshadowing what happens in the third period is that, this is Connor McDavid beating a Kings player one-on-one, and he's beating one of the best defensive players of all time in Anze Kopitar, but he does have a pretty good grip on his stick it's like a running back with the straight arm. And I saw after the goal was scored, and I saw Anze Kopitar just sort of look at the official. He didn't complain. That's not who he is really. And it is 4-1. But I wondered in that moment, he did have a hold of his stick, but that's sort of how he does his thing, right? And, he repeat similar types of things in the third period. But, that's, and it's the nuclear option, right? You had McDavid and Draisaitl, and they were on together a lot last night because of the way the game unfolded. But what a great pass and what a great shot and all those things. But I did say I was like, I hate that goal, right? You hate 6 seconds, and Kopitar cannot control McDavid. And this is no slight against Anze Kopitar, but still, that's matchup you don't mind having, and it still ends up in the back of your net.
Well, Scott, this is a me issue and not a you issue, but I'm gonna. I was scrolling through the NHL.com recap of the game last night, and they have these graphics inserted in between the paragraph breaks and everything, and I was trying to find a replay of Quentin Byfield's goal. And one of the graphics was like, Connor McDavid 4-point night. And I just thought, for God's sake, is that not the story of this game? Like, we spend, apologies, rant incoming, we spend so much time all year long worshiping at the altar of Connor McDavid. His team lost. Like, I'm not sure that everybody saw that game, but the Oilers lost the game and really only were in it because the Kings couldn't bury an empty net goal. We'll get to that later. And so, yes, Connor McDavid committed what should have been called a penalty, and yes, it led to a goal. And I just sort of like, other than this moment, I have kind of decided I'm not talking about Connor McDavid until their team wins. Like, I'm just not. They're good. He's good. Fine. I get it. But his team lost. Like, I've had it with Connor McDavid.
Fair enough. All right.
It's just, anyway, sorry. Like I said, it's a me problem, not a you problem. So that made it 4-1. Jumping to the third period, and this is when we're going to revisit that conversation about the fourth line, because that first goal in the third period was against the fourth line. And it was Janmark's goal. You mentioned it earlier, Scott, from Frederick and Skinner. Good for Jeff Skinner to finally get in a playoff game. I'll talk about Skinner. I'm not going to talk about the other guy. But that was kind of it for the fourth line. Yeah. And I said that I wanted to mention Jordan Spence and Brant Clark, because Jordan Spence only played 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Brant Clark played 11 minutes and 29 seconds. This was not Jordan Spence's first playoff experience, but it was Turcotte, Hellenius, and Malot's, and I believe Clark's as well. in the NHL, I should say.
Yeah.
And I don't know, because I've never been an NHL coach, obviously, Jack. I'm not those five guys, did not have the greatest showing last night. Jordan Spence looked a little shaky at times early in the game, right? There were passes thrown to his feet or passes that he threw into guys' feet. It was a tough night for him, and it was a tough night for the third line. Obviously, they didn't get a ton of minutes, but I did wonder, as that goal was scored, if perhaps it doesn't become a snake eating its own tail or a self-fulfilling prophecy, where if you don't play guys in big games many minutes and then you put them out late in a big game, yeah, at that point, that those guys have played 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes 45 seconds probably of playoff hockey in their life, and now it's the third period and Edmonton's pressing, and stuff happens.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of maybe some of their quote unquote performances. Like you said, Spence looked a little bit shaky in that second period, and then obviously we didn't really see him the rest of the game. But Jim Hiller's done this a handful of times, and whenever we've asked about it, he talks about how he didn't want to put a player in that position and the way the flow of the game was going. He talked. I recall, a few times where Turcotte was on the first line in the beginning of the year, and then they put him down to the fourth line, and then he didn't play the rest of the game. But Hiller, would talk about how, he hadn't stepped on the ice in 20, 30 minutes of real time, so he didn't feel confident that it was fair to throwing him out on the ice. So I think that was a little bit of that situation, but then also, the trust factor, the way the game was flowing, didn't want to take a chance. And like you said, after that second goal from Matthias Janmark, that was the last we saw of the fourth line, and I think of Jordan Spence on the night. So
yeah.
It's a narrative you've got to pay attention to in terms of how much ice time and, how much can you rest the legs of some of the top guys. But is this team that's going to roll three lines? That's what Edmonton did, but at the same time, they're used to it. The Kings aren't. So does it catch up with them the last half of the series, depending on how long it goes or however long the playoff run is? It'll be interesting for us to pay attention to, for sure.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to say, my guess is that, you wipe the slate clean, and again, because you win a game that, as wacky as it turned out to be, you start the slate clean for game 2 on Wednesday night. Be interesting to hear Jim Hiller's talk about his lineup. Does he make a change? Does he not? My guess is you try and get that fourth line to play as much as the situation allows them to play, and they will have a say in that. So will the circumstances of the game, penalties, all those kinds of things. But my guess is that we have this conversation after game 2. My guess is it might be dramatically different in terms of how that fourth line gets used and how many minutes they play, but we'll see.
The next,
I think that's such a great point, Scott.
Yeah.
Sorry, just the last thing. I think that's such a great point. I totally agree in the terms of wipe the slate clean. Game 2 is a completely new game. All of a sudden, say they have another few good shifts and whistles don't come when they're supposed to be up, and a commercial break hits and you want to send the top line back out there. All of a sudden, maybe they play double the amount of minutes and maybe they look fine. It's a totally different situation for that fourth line. I completely agree, Scott. That's a great point.
Next note I have, Wallman, who multiple times during this game, I had to look up and go like, who is 96 on their team? Like, I had totally forgotten they acquired him, and I never bothered to remember that he wore number 96, but he does. And he got a little chippy himself for a few shifts in a row. At one point, I believe he had Kuzmenko down on the ice, and Kevin Fiala got involved. Then he and Fiala were, barking at each other on the other end of the ice. I thought Fiala might do something dangerous or stupid. He did not, and then Wallman winds up getting called finally.
Composure.
No, that is 100% where I'm going, Jack, because Wallman gets a penalty and the Kings make him pay. by scoring their second power play goal of the night. And this is just another moment where I was in the press box as a fan thinking to myself, for God's sake, somebody do something. Somebody stop this menace of 96 on the Oilers. And as much as I don't want to see Fiala revert back into the guy who creates a lot of turnovers and takes a lot of silly penalties, he didn't. He had a couple choice words for him, and I don't know, Scott, if maybe that missed call at the end of the second period went in the Kings' favor later on down the road, but the Kings get a power play and they don't let Edmonton get in their heads and under their skin, and they make them pay with a power play goal. And I thought it was like a really important moment.
Yeah, no, it's no question. Listen, when you give out 6 goals, lots of blame to go around, but I'll tell you, it wasn't a great night for Jake Wallman.
No.
Who, later, helped set up a 2-minute 5-on-3, which is another story, not capitalizing on that, set the stage for other mayhem. But in that moment, when all is said and done, his cross-check on Phil Deneau after a couple of, you're right, the shifts of, being right over the edge, or on the edge, right? And I thought that game was officiated pretty darn well last night, by and large. And it was a penalty that deserved to be called. It was called. It set up what looked like a very brief. Well, it was a very brief 5-on-3 that was even more brief because the Kings scored seconds after the puck was dropped, and just a rocket from Kevin Fiala. And those are the ones you want to, like, to me, it's punishing a team. It goes back to what you guys are talking about, composure and how you respond to these kinds of things. What's the worst possible thing you can do to Jake Wallman? Well, it's not to stick him in the knee. It's to score that goal, which should have ended things. And later he takes a delay of game penalty, and it wasn't a great night for him. And it's good to punish players when they make those kinds of mistakes, as opposed to trying to exact some sort of physical retribution, which leads you nowhere.
It might feel good in the moment, but it's not going to help you long term. Yeah. Then Corey Perry scores a goal, and this was my only note on that: 5-3 stupid Oilers. Because at that point, Scott, I did think it was over. I mean, I assume most people did. It's okay, fine. You didn't win 5-2. All right, so it's 5-3 now. Then was the power play off the puck off the glass, which I have to confess I thought it did. I thought it was off the glass. I'm going to read 3 notes in a row, and then we can get into the whole thing. My first note was power play with 11:07, must score here, or at least control play on the power play, because didn't want Edmonton to get momentum off of a solid penalty kill. Then I wrote Edmonton challenges 3 question marks. I didn't know you could do that. Until last night, I was not aware you could challenge that penalty. I guess that's a new rule this season. I might have had that in my brain somewhere, but last night I was not. I was very confused. Then I wrote, this is taking forever. Edmonton loses the challenge. Kings earn an extra penalty. Now you have to score. All caps. Have to score. They didn't. In the moment, Jack, I didn't think it was terribly important that they didn't, because they did control play on that 5-on-3. They hit a post. They had a couple good scoring chances. And so I felt like, okay, they didn't score. 6-2 would have felt, or 6-3 at that point would have felt nicer. But let's be realistic. It's a tall mountain for the Oilers to climb at that point. I think there were 10 minutes left in the third. And they did control it. So I didn't write down anything dramatic, like if the Kings don't score here, they lose the series, or something that I might have written in years past. Because of how the rest of the third period played out, and I don't want to step on it too much, I had people looking back at that 5-on-3 at Kings Talk and saying like, oh, they should have scored there. You got to put them away. You got to make the lead bigger. And my attitude was kind of like, I don't know. Like, do you have to when you're up 5-3? Like, it's hard for me to criticize a team for not making it 6-3.
I'm gonna push back on that one.
Okay,
I actually thought that was a must score. I think you've got a 2-goal lead against Edmonton Oilers, who have the momentum, right? They cut the lead from 5-3 or 5-2 to 5-3. How many times have we seen this Edmonton team in the playoffs against the Kings do this, right? They've had multi-goal comebacks. You go back to when they blew a 3-goal lead and were eliminated from the playoffs. I mean, was it last year, the year before? I can't even remember. But, for me, I thought that was a must score. You've got a 5-on-3 and to a few things there was, you talk about they control play. Well, of course, it's a 5-on-3. They're going to control the puck. For me, that was a must score. That 3-goal lead with 10 minutes to go, much more confident than a 2-goal lead against an Edmonton Oilers team that has the best player in the world and debatably the second best player in the world. So for me, I thought that was that there could have sealed the game. Of course, they didn't score, and by all means, we paid for it. But for me, that was that. It was a multitude of missed opportunities to be able to not have to deal with the chaos that ensued. That to me was the first of 3 or 4 chances to ice the game.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of a cascading type of thing, right? I mean, and then so you get through that, and I think there's like 6 minutes, from the end of that penalty, it's around the 11-minute mark when the Wallman and the delay of game penalty or the challenge penalties are done. Like you're still, still unfortunately a lot of time left, but it goes 5 or 6 minutes, and you're still up by 2. So yes, Kevin Fiala, pounds 2 or 3 pucks high and wide or wide and high, and I think he broke his stick on one effort, and yeah, it looks like it shouldn't matter, but it did matter.
Well,
this is playing the Oilers is the exact, for me, it's you can't play with your food, right? When you have the chance to throw a knockout punch against this team, you have to absolutely do it because, again, in 18 games and now 19 playoff games, the amount of comebacks that we have seen this team make against the Kings specifically, you have to throw that knockout punch when you have the opening. And again, the Kings escaped. They got the win, but by all means, this game did not have to be a 6-5 win with 40 seconds left in the game. This game easily could have been over with 8 minutes to go.
Correct.
We'll come back to that. Jack, you made a point in the press box during the game following their failure to score on that 5-on-3, and you made a comment somewhere along the lines of the Kings have to play with their heads up and pay more attention right now because we know that there's a penalty coming against them soon, right? The next penalty that gets called is likely on the Kings, and sure enough, the next penalty called was against the Kings. It was only the second penalty that the Kings took in the game. And it was when Victor Arvidsson pulled Mikey Anderson's stick into him, and the refs bought it. And the penalty could have easily been holding the stick on Arvidsson, but it wasn't. It was hooking, I believe, on Mikey Anderson.
It was a hook.
All right.
The stick's up in his gut. Arvidsson may help that along. With sticks in the gut. Call it every time. So, and the crazy part is that doesn't hurt them either.
No, they killed that penalty. I just wrote lame after that because Jack was right, and whatever, doesn't matter. A few moments later,
can't give a ref can't give a ref any reason, and the stick went horizontal. Arvidsson helped hold it in his place, but can't. But that's the precedent that's been set this year. It started at game 1 of the NHL season, and the second that stick goes horizontal, you're in trouble.
Like I said, I wrote lame in my notes. That was it. That was the sum total of my thoughts. I singled this moment out. I don't think it mattered in the course of the game, but it gives us an opportunity to talk about this player. Connor McDavid began, and I'm sorry, I'm breaking my own rule. I will talk about Connor McDavid. He crossed the blue line with the puck, looking very much like he had a head of steam and like he was intent on doing something impressive, right? Like he looked like, by God, I'm going to make it onto SportsCenter by scoring a meaningless goal in a 5-4 loss. And everybody will still talk about me because look at what I can do, even though my team lost. And yet Phil Deneau just poked the puck right off of his stick. And that was the end of now I understand he finished the night with 4 points. Good for him. But no flashy individual play there. And Phil Deneau, that's the real reason I'm bringing this up. I just thought he had a dynamite game, Scott. Aside from scoring 2 goals and obviously the game winner, I just thought he was we've talked about how Warren Fogle is the quintessential Kings player, and Andrei Kuzmenko has joined the team and fit in and found this identity to his game that maybe before we'd never seen. But Phil Deneau was just doing Phil Deneau things last night, and I thought it was incredibly important.
Yeah, and I think he's a really important person in that locker room. And I think, I thought Andrei Kopitar, answered that question pretty well last night about how listen, he wasn't a great year offensively for Phil Deneau, and at the end of the day, none of that matters if he plays like he did in game one. And you're right, the 2 goals, and we'll get to the second one, which was with the lob wedge, I believe. And, his importance to that team extends so far beyond, the goals and assists. And that's a terrific highlight that you noted, Jesse. And it is interesting though how how Jim Hiller deployed against Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl last night. Quentin Byfield getting a lot more share of that workload and that burden. So those 3 centers, and I think that's really important. As in spite of how it unfolded there, I think it's great that you have 3 centers now. And it doesn't really matter because I always think that sometimes coaches can get so lost and you go down the rabbit hole of the matchups and it disrupts everything. Again, go back to it. Kings play 5-on-5. That this is the best recipe for them. And then the fact that it doesn't really matter who of those top 3 centers plays against their top 2 superstars, I think that's, again, part of an ideal setup for the Kings. And Phil Deneau was right at the top of his game on a number of levels last night.
There was only one more note before we get to the final few minutes. And it's just Nugent Hopkins and Gavrikov exchange pleasantries, because at that point it was 5-3, and I thought that might mean something or set a tone or lead into the next. I don't know. I just was like, oh, that's interesting. Gavrikov seems very physically involved. And then the next note is oh, and the next note after that is oh no. And then I didn't write anything after that because I was too caught up in the game. But let's talk about the 2 goals that Edmonton scored and then the Phil Deneau goal to win the game, because Jack, you talked about the 5-on-3, and Scott, we sort of referenced it earlier. I understand that Edmonton scored 2 empty net goals and made it 5-5, and things could have gone horribly wrong, and this conversation could have a totally different tone this morning. And I understand that if my aunt had wheels, she'd be a bicycle. But if the Kings had scored into the empty net on one of multiple opportunities to do so, Edmonton doesn't score 2 empty net goals. Maybe they score one. Maybe Jeff Skinner goes right back in the net and the game slowly winds down to a 6-3 win for LA. And nobody on SportsCenter or TSN is talking about what a close game or the plucky Oilers or how they're inevitable or whatever. Like, sorry, Scott, I'm just very bitter about the coverage the Oilers get. But it didn't happen, and that's a problem, right? There are people out there saying like, well, without Kemper, the Kings, wouldn't be as good, would they? And I was like, yeah, but they have him. So, I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie Layer Cake, but there's a scene where the punk villains are saying to the tough villains, well, you wouldn't be so tough without, Morty behind you. And then Morty says, yeah, but he's got me, doesn't he? And you go like, yeah, okay. So you can't, I get it. You can't what if things away. But the reality is the Kings did, like, I don't think this was a game where Edmonton fought back in the third period and quote unquote earned a late tie. Like, things happened and Edmonton's got 2 incredible players, to Jack's point. And if you give them an opportunity to burn you, they will burn you. But I don't think it's like Edmonton held the Kings down and burned them. I think the Kings just missed at least 3 opportunities to put this one away, and they didn't. And hopefully moving forward, Scott, lesson learned.
Well, and I think that is the whole thing. And it was not to pile on Kevin Fiala for his misses in the third period, but airmail's an empty net opportunity. There were a couple of others. Go back to the 5-on-3 you scored.
Yeah.
Again, you're absolutely right. But what did those goals don't go. And as much as you dislike the idea of it, Connor McDavid beats Gavrikov 1-on-1 to make it 5-4. And then, Mikey Anderson's out closer to the blue line and Connor goes right by him. and a goal that seemed to surprise Darcy Comfort to make it 5-5. And, it is what it is. And I just love how, to me, the great thing is, as we sort of talked about it off the top, so many times, the ending is already then pre-written. The Oilers win this game. And yet, that's not how it turned out.
Yeah, they didn't.
Yeah,
just have to remind everybody again.
Yeah, no, that's you're right. And listen, well, let me ask. We can answer this question now, or after we talk about the field goal or whatever. But what's this conversation like if it's 6-5 Edmonton in overtime? What's this conversation like? And we don't have to answer that question because it didn't happen that way, and the Kings are exactly where they want to be after game one.
Well, if I may, and Jack will get to you in a second, but I just want to interject this thought here. I can tell you how the conversation starts, Scott, if Edmonton wins that game in overtime. And the fact that I know how the conversation starts, I believe, strengthens my point that it wasn't the game that is being described in a lot of places. I see the conversation starts with the phrase Edmonton or the Kings snatched defeat away from the jaws of victory.
Yes.
Right. That's okay. Well, the very fact that phrase popped into my mind because it's such a cliche and it absolutely would have applied. That's all we need to say about it, right? Snatching a loss out of the jaws of victory is exactly what that would have been. Now, fortunately, Phil Deneau is a golden god of a hockey player, and we don't have to use that phrase. But yeah, I mean, I just, well, I don't know, feel like my thoughts are fairly clear. And if not, go listen to King's Talk, everybody. Jack, I mean, before we get into Phil Deneau's goal, if you thought the 5-on-3 was the must score, how about that empty net situation?
Well, can I begin with, did you guys know that Connor McDavid had 4 points in the game?
I'm aware. Yeah.
4 magical points.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 4 magical points and an unsuccessful comeback. But yeah, you missed 3 empty netters, one of which was, just over the net. I don't know how you go over the net on an empty net opportunity, but again, he had a heck of a game. Missed an opportunity there. Of course, Trevor Moore, ices the puck within a foot of going into the net. Drew Doughty does the same thing. So again, there's 3 opportunities to ice. The one concern is now you've given this Edmonton Oilers team, regardless, you won game 1, you've given Edmonton a little bit of momentum in terms of being able to see the puck go in the net, find their offense, and that can be of concern. I think, and we'll get to the note piece here in a sec, but I think as both teams looking ahead at game 2, both teams can I wouldn't say be happy with where the series is at, but both teams can look at it and be like, we're fine. This is not an issue, right? Because you've got the Kings being like, we won game 1, doesn't matter how, we're up 1-0, we have home ice, we're fine. And then Edmonton is, fine, they had a multiple amount of players that hadn't played in a week or two because of their injuries, and all of a sudden they found their legs, they found their offense in the third period. So they're probably feeling good about where their game is at, even though they didn't win in the comeback effort. But most importantly for the Kings is, like you said, there's a narrative that had already been written, and we've seen it happen in time and time again in the last 3 playoff seasons. Now, all of a sudden, that's a different narrative. It's another reason for Kings fans or the team in the locker room to believe that this is a different team. This is a different scenario. These are 2 different matchups between both 2 clubs. That hasn't been the case in the last 3 seasons.
Right.
I do want to talk about the Deneau goal. Obviously, we want to talk about the Deneau goal.
Really?
But I want to talk about the celebration almost more than the goal, because the goal was great. Not Mike Anderson, excuse me. Trevor Moore enters the zone, pulls up. You think he's going to hit Fogel. He doesn't. He hits Deneau. Fogel goes to the net. He leaps up. I loved that Phil Deneau, when asked about it in the post-game press conference, said, I think I got all of that one. Obviously, he did not think that. He laughed after it. But the celebration when Fogel bends over and three little quick fist jabs towards the ground. I'm not sure if he actually touched the ice. I thought Warren Fogel's soul was going to escape out of the back of his body, and I just thought he was going to explode. It clearly meant, and maybe I'm reading into this. I know I'm reading into it because I haven't spoken to Warren Fogel about it, but obviously it must feel tremendous to win a game in the dying moments like that when you've given up a 2-goal lead, on empty net situations. But the fact that it was Edmonton, right, his old team, the fact that he was on there, he's talked about the trust that Jim Hiller has given in him to play more minutes and play a specific role, and he's out there with Deneau and Moore, who he's been paired with since, I think, just before the trade deadline, or at least half the season anyway. Given the season he's had, and, I voted him for best newcomer, Scott. I don't know what was on your ballot or yours, Jack, but I just thought, what a tremendous moment, and how great for those guys to be on the ice for it, particularly Warren Fogel, and the way he just, that was like a true human, like he just couldn't contain himself. And I didn't cry, but I came very, very close, which is rare at a hockey game.
No,
I also want to give credit to, sorry, you go, Scott. Well, I want to give credit to Warren Fogel's vertical too.
Yeah,
He got 4 or 5 feet in the air, his legs were above the shoulder of Skinner. And you talk about the celebration. I'll go back to the play itself. Of course, Warren Fogel doesn't factor in, I believe, on the score sheet for the goal, but for him, he makes that whole play. And it's not just the screen, it's the middle lane drive that opens up the whole slot for Deneau to have clean access, for that rocket of a one-timer. And, for Deneau to, of course, pull out the pitching wedge or whatever short iron he wanted on that play. Fogel takes the eyes of Skinner away. He has no idea where the puck is because of Warren Fogel. And like you said, the emotion comes out in what is, you have to believe, mostly relief for a team that obviously had been shell shocked in the moment. So, it's a great finish to the game. That's why you love playoff hockey. You just never know what you're going to get. And for the Kings to kind of flip the narrative of, here we go again, to, a simple belief of, maybe this is our year in terms of not only getting past the Oilers, but higher, expectations and moving forward. But it starts with the game 1 win, and for the team to be able to come back and stop the bleeding and hand that knockout punch in regulation. Thank God, because good Lord, that could have been a very interesting intermission and a lot of pins and needles in the stands after watching a 5-2 lead. Of course, go to his goals. In a span of 3-4 minutes.
I do also want to mention Gavrikov, because he's not going to get mentioned a lot in that play, but he marked his man well in the defensive zone and plucked the puck out of midair to create the turnover, and then got the puck up off the wall to Trevor Morris. This is a really nice play by Gavrikov. And to your point, Jack, about Warren Fogel jumping up in the air, before I had seen the replays, I didn't realize that Deneau had chipped it in. I thought he did get it flush, and I thought it went off of Warren Fogel at one point. Yeah. And I was wondering, I was like, oh no, it was that too high? Like, did that bounce off of him above? Like, I was like, oh. But no, it just fluttered in, as they say, Scott.
No, it was it was in some ways a perfectly fitting end to a titanic playoff hockey game, man. Like you can't draw the script up because it's beyond belief in some ways. So put it in your pocket, take 48 hours and see what happens on Wednesday night. I can't wait.
Yeah, well, so I can't remember, Scott, you and I were chatting before the game started, and I don't remember if I had said it to you or someone else, but I said before the game, and I can admit it fully now because the Kings won, so good. But before the game, I was more curious about how the game was going to go than I was anxiously anticipating a Kings win. Like, it was the first time in my life where I was just like, listen, I'm a Kings fan. I want the Kings to win. I work for the team, so there's obviously personal and financial reasons that I should be invested in this. But I would just really want to see how it ends. So we're going to wrap it up here. We've, I think, talked long enough about this game. And as both of you and I have said, at this point, you put this one in your back pocket. You don't worry about it. You won. It's 1-0. Jack, you said both teams can come away from that game feeling good about things that went their way. Scott, they can both learn from this game. But ultimately, it takes 4 to win. And the Kings need 3 now. And Edmonton still needs 4. Which is how many points Connor McDavid got last night. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. Anyway, Scott, thanks for joining me.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Anytime. It's great to see you back at the rink last night.
So I'll be there on Wednesday, but turns out I am starting chemo on Thursday, so we'll see what that does for Kings Talk and the rest of it. Jack, thank you for joining me.
As always, and I second what Scott said. It's great to see you, and most importantly, good luck with your chemo.
Thank you. And we'll talk to you soon, Kings fans. Pay close attention to the schedule and everything, because things will be shifting and changing on my end and not the Kings end. But if you like listening to this program, stay tuned, and we'll talk to you soon.